17,400,000 people voted for it. They were told it was done. They were told Britain had left. They were told the arguments were over and the decision had been made. And for a few years, it almost felt like that was true. But today, something happened in Westminster that dragged Brexit back into the centre of British politics, and not in the way Keir Starmer planned. Because here is what nobody is saying clearly enough. Starmer didn't just try to get closer to the EU. He tried to do it quietly, without a mandate, without a referendum, without asking the 17.4 million people who voted leave whether they were okay with it. And the EU said no anyway. Stay with me, because the story of what happened today, and what it means for the next 12 months of British politics, is far more serious than the headlines are letting on. And there is one moment, one specific consequence of today's rejection, that Starmer's team will be absolutely dreading. It's coming. But first you need to understand exactly what he tried to do and why it has blown up so spectacularly in his face. Let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand today, you need to understand the position Starmer put himself in. When Labour won the general election, Starmer made a promise. A clear, public, unambiguous promise. No return to the single market. No return to the customs union. Respect the result of the referendum. Those were his words. That was the deal he offered to Brexit voting communities in the Midlands, in the North, in Wales, the communities that Labour needed to win, and that, after last month's local elections, Labour is now losing again at terrifying speed. And honestly, for a while it looked like he was keeping that promise. But then something shifted. Behind closed doors, conversations started happening. Proposals started circulating. And what emerged, what his government has reportedly been pushing, is something called a single market for goods alignment. A plan to bring British trade standards into alignment with EU rules in a way that would make cross-channel trade easier, smoother, cheaper. On paper, that sounds reasonable. In practice, think about what it actually means. It means British businesses following EU rules they have no vote on. It means regulatory alignment with a bloc Britain voted to leave. It means, in the words of one senior Conservative MP this week, the worst of both worlds, outside the EU, paying the economic costs of Brexit, but still following Brussels rules without any of the political representation. Now here's the crazy part. Starmer knew this was politically dangerous. His own advisers knew it. The internal polling was screaming at them. Because in the communities that swung this last election, Hartlepool, Wigan, Sunderland, the places reform just swept through like a wildfire, Brexit isn't ancient history. It is personal. It is identity. It is the one moment in a generation when ordinary people felt like their voice actually mattered. And Starmer tried to quietly unpick it. But here's the part that makes today so much worse than just a political miscalculation. The EU said no. Not a partial rejection. Not a come back with amendments. A rejection of core elements of the proposal. European negotiators, according to reports this week, pushed back hard on key aspects of the alignment plan, concerned about Britain cherry-picking access to the single market for goods without accepting the broader obligations that come with it. Freedom of movement. Budget contributions. Jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. The EU has been here before. They know what British governments ask for. And they know that every time a British Prime Minister comes to Brussels saying, "I want the benefits without the costs," the answer is the same. No. So what has Starmer actually achieved? He has reopened the Brexit wound, the most divisive political question of a generation, without getting anything in return. He has reminded 17.4 million Leave voters that the political class never really accepted the result. And he has handed Nigel Farage the most powerful political gift imaginable. Think about that for a second. Farage has spent the last 2 years building reform into a genuine electoral force. He has 1,000 council seats. He has a projected 284 parliamentary seats if a general election were held tomorrow. He has been waiting, patiently, strategically, for the moment that Labour does something that lets him say, "I told you so." Today is that moment. And this is where the situation gets genuinely uncomfortable for Labour. Because it's not just Farage who is watching this unfold with something approaching delight. It's Labour's own voters. The internal numbers inside the Labour Party right now are bad. Not just bad, alarming. After last month's local elections, where Labour lost over 1,500 council seats in a single night, the mood in the Parliamentary Labour Party is not just anxious. It is angry. There are MPs, sitting Labour MPs, who represent Brexit voting constituencies and who are now having to explain to their constituents why their Prime Minister is trying to realign Britain with the EU after they voted to leave it. One Labour MP, speaking privately this week, put it like this: "We haven't just opened a can of worms. We've opened every can of worms in the building and tipped them on the floor." That is a Labour MP. About their own government. This week. And the numbers tell the same story. The latest polling has Reform at 29%. Labour at 24%. The gap is widening, not narrowing. And in the specific communities where this Brexit realignment story will land hardest, the post-industrial towns, the coastal seats, the places that voted 65%, 70% to leave, Reform isn't just competitive. They are dominant. But wait. Because there is something underneath all of this that the mainstream coverage is completely missing. Something about the timing of today's news that makes Starmer's position so much more precarious than it first appears. Here is what I want you to hold in your mind. Starmer did not just get rejected by the EU today. He got rejected at the worst possible political moment of his entire premiership. 4 weeks ago, Labour lost 1,500 council seats. 3 weeks ago, internal Labour figures began privately briefing journalists that Starmer had to change course. 2 weeks ago, 56 Labour MPs, his own MPs, signed a letter calling for a change in direction. And this week, as all of that pressure was building, as the party was trying to project calm, as Starmer was attempting to look like a Prime Minister still in control, this week, the news broke that his signature foreign policy initiative had been rejected. This is not just bad timing. This is the worst possible sequence of events. Because here is how it looks to a Brexit voter watching at home. Their Prime Minister, who promised to respect the referendum result, tried to quietly move Britain back towards EU rules. The EU rejected it, which means Britain got none of the benefits he was promising. And the whole episode has reminded them, loudly and publicly, that the establishment never accepted what they voted for. That is the political reality of today. And Farage, watching from the other side, is not just smiling. He is preparing. Because within hours of today's news breaking, Reform sources were already briefing, already framing, already positioning this as exactly what they have been saying for years, that Brexit was never going to be honoured by the political class, that the establishment would always find a way to drift back towards Brussels, that the only people who would genuinely defend the referendum result are Reform. And here is the brutal truth that Starmer's team will not say publicly but absolutely knows is true. That argument lands. In the communities that matter. In the seats that will decide the next general election. In the towns where people remember exactly what they voted for and why. Farage doesn't need to make a clever argument about trade policy or regulatory alignment. He just needs to say 4 words: "They never respected you." And in Hartlepool, in Wigan, in Sunderland, those 4 words are worth more than any policy document Labour can produce. But here is where things get even more serious. And this is the part of the story that nobody is covering properly. Because this isn't just about Brexit. It never really was. What today's rejection represents, the EU saying no, Labour being exposed, Farage being handed ammunition, is part of a much bigger story about what is happening to British politics right now. In the space of 12 months, we have seen Reform go from a protest movement to the most popular party in the country. We have seen Labour lose 1,500 council seats in a single night. We have seen a Prime Minister being booed in the street by his own supporters. We have seen internal Labour figures briefing journalists that their own government is dying. We have seen the EU reject British proposals. And we have seen Farage, a man who spent 20 years being dismissed as a fringe figure, become the most consequential politician in the country. This is not normal political turbulence. This is something more fundamental. A realignment that has been building for years and is now accelerating. And Starmer, with today's EU rejection, has just poured fuel on it. Think about what happens next. The Brexit voting communities that were already drifting to reform now have a fresh reason to go. The Labour MPs who were already nervous now have a fresh crisis to manage. The reform poll numbers that were already rising now have a fresh story to rise on. And Farage, who was already the most dangerous political opponent Starmer has ever faced, now has the single most powerful argument of the next election cycle handed to him on a plate. I told you. They never really believed in Brexit. They never really respected your vote. And here is the proof. Here is my honest view. And I'm going to say it plainly because that's what this channel is about. Starmer's instinct to try to improve Britain's relationship with the EU is not wrong on its merits. The trade friction created by Brexit is real. The economic costs are real. The diplomatic isolation is real. A pragmatic Prime Minister looking for practical solutions to those problems is doing his job. But the execution has been catastrophic. Because you cannot try to quietly realign Britain with EU rules, without a mandate, without a referendum, without even a public debate, in communities that voted 65% to leave and expect it to go unnoticed. You cannot make that move in the middle of the worst polling crisis of your premiership, for weeks after losing 1,500 council seats, with reform at 29% and rising. And you absolutely cannot afford to make that move and then have it rejected. Because now you have all of the political cost with none of the economic benefit. The walls are moving in on Keir Starmer. Not slowly. Not gradually. Quickly now. The local elections were a warning. The internal Labour briefings were a warning. The polling numbers were a warning. And today, the EU rejection, the Brexit wound reopened, Farage handed his argument. Today is something more than a warning. Today is the moment that a future political historian will point to and say, that is when it became very hard to see how this ends well for Labour. The next few weeks are going to be unlike anything we have seen in British politics in years. Farage will move quickly on this. Reform will move quickly. And somewhere inside the Labour Party, right now, MPs are looking at today's news and asking themselves a question they have been avoiding for months. How much longer can this go on? I want to hear from you. Do you think Starmer can recover from this? Or is this the moment Brexit comes back to finish him off? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And subscribe. Because what happens between Starmer, Farage, and Brussels over the next few weeks is going to be one of the most dramatic political stories this country has seen in years. And this channel will be here with every part of it.